I think Fresno Building Healthy Communities has just poured into in every possible way into the residents of the city of Fresno.
Fresno BHC, that is just the beautiful part of how that power has evolved, which is no longer asking for permission, but getting it done.
I think what they do really well is they understand the needs of our young people, and they understand the resources that it takes.
Their life path is somewhere now that it would never have been without BHC's direction, resourcing, and actual equipping.
I'm inspired by Fresno BHC. I'm inspired by the desire for a different future. It's pretty unstoppable.
I think BHC gives me the most hope because it's relentless and fierce.
Working with Fresno BHC, I saw that if you could actually take action and work together and organize and mobilize and get empowered, that you could make change happen.
Fresno BHC was really able to uplift and really just shine a light across all of the city of Fresno, but then across the state as well.
BHC gave us the support and gave us the skills to be able to be at the table and for our elected officials look at us and actually fear us because they're like, damn, we haven't seen this side of community before, right?
Fresno BHC is a tremendous leader. And, it really startles me to think about what would happen without them.
So as I think about the evolution of building healthy communities, it's really a beautiful thing that really changed the whole paradigm in the way in which we organize and work in Fresno. So Fresno Building Healthy Communities begins with this investment in youth and in communities, and they come in with an idea. And as they work with community, that idea begins to change, and those of us on the ground see they're actually listening. And so 10 years later, we see a group who made the adjustments, who came in with the plan, were flexible and adaptive, and said, you know what, let's listen to community. And through listening to community, they've changed so many things, and they're now at a point where community can really be empowered and has a voice, because this juggernaut came in and said, this is how change is made, by listening to the people.
Young people stormed our board meeting. We had one board meeting, one historic board meeting at the Fresno TCE office, and young people stormed it and decided to completely change the conversation about health and really push up the issue of school discipline and punitive school discipline policy, and really center their experiences about it and what they were living on a day-to-day basis, and how their education was suffering and therefore their health was suffering because they were getting suspended and expelled from school for the most mundane, ridiculous reasons.
I think that we need to have systems in place in our schools where justice prevails, where our students are given the opportunities, the chances, the understanding to grow as a person, learn from their misbehaviors if there are any, and just be treated as a human being.
The value of addressing crime early on, especially when it is usually a mistake that a young person makes that gets an opportunity to learn. If that mistake is taken as a crime instead of resolved, that sets a trajectory to becoming incarcerated. We do know that if a young person gets the opportunity of a restorative process and gets to make things right in their community, addresses those that they've harmed, that person no longer is then engaged in the criminal justice system. We also know that law enforcement is actually very supportive of young people getting a restorative opportunity before they get arrested or even cited. What BHC believes fundamentally is that every person gets the opportunity for a restorative process before a punitive one.
The 2035 general plan in Fresno was really a significant moment in the development of Fresno, and it was a moment that was 6 years long. So in 2009, we started with the whole idea that it shouldn't just be the case that a few property owners should be in a back room figuring out where they owned land and where they wanted to develop in the city of Fresno, and therefore that was the general plan. And that had really been the city's history and the way it had approached its planning and the previous iterations. But along came 2009, along came Fresno BHC.
Those early battles about the general plan and the Darling rendering plan and the Brentag chemical facility,
I think that's where Fresno BHC, where we were really learning how to talk about land use and industrial siting in a way that brought it home to people, how it literally impacted their bodies and their health, how it was killing us, right? How to begin to explain that what surrounds us is killing us. And it's not written in stone. There are ways in which you can remove a rendering plant. There are ways in which you can change the zoning so you don't have a bunch of industrial sites surrounding your child's school, so that they don't have to walk to school and walk over dead animal carcasses. That there are ways to fix that.
I learned that, you know, if you're looking for change, you don't really get to be in charge of what the change is. You know, as an elected official who was trying so hard to say what we've done in the past is not serving our residents well, let's do something different. That was my role. It wasn't necessarily my role to figure out exactly what therefore needed to happen in the future. That was the role of community. That was the role of BHC's partners. That was the role of all the residents.
The general plan update really brought that opportunity to create the community that folks have been, you know, striving for, folks have been fighting for generations. And so it really opened the door for that involvement. You know, to this day we have very well-informed folks of like, nope, I can talk to you about this, and you know, even if I'm not using your fancy words, I know what you're talking about, and I can, you know, I can tell you this isn't right. And just because you're saying, oh well, you know, this is how it was planned for in the 40s and 60s and 80s, you know, that means nothing to me. You know, I may not see the changes today or tomorrow, but like, you know, hopefully over, you know, the next couple years, my children, grandchildren will see those changes.
Fresno, for decades, had something called the Medically Indigent Services Program. And that program, while not sufficient, right, for families, it provided an enormous cover for those who were experiencing illness and were undocumented in this community.
Well, basically, they felt that now that we had the Affordable Care Act, there was not a need for MISP, which was way off. You know, there was still a large population of our folks that weren't being covered.
I thought that this is so important, and like learning more about it, learning more about it from the colleagues and the program itself, I began to see how it affected like folks across our community. And for me, and for someone who's Hmong, I saw the connection there. I saw that this affects folks, day-to-day folks in our community, and that something had to be done to save this program.
No one except for the members in the coalition at Fresno BHC paid attention. And so what it felt like to know that Fresno BHC was all in at a time when all of us didn't feel powerful, right? We didn't feel like we could change things. It was everything. It was everything in that moment, because we had to be strong when speaking with the community. But amongst each other, we could cry, we could talk about this, we could strategize. And at the end of the day, this was about human beings for us. This fight is really about whether people will be able to access healthcare. But that coalition, that organization, Fresno BHC, has meant so much to so many of us, because it's these moments where it seems like there isn't hope, like you're up against every single power in the world, but to have these people who have your back, and it just means everything.
It was an emotional roller coaster, because one minute, you know, you're on this high thinking things are going well. The next you're low, and you know, sometimes you wanted to lash out, and you know, and people communications will remind you like, no, let's stay with the narrative, right? You know, yes, you want to lash out because you're a human being, but you're also an advocate. And how do you strategically keep to the narrative so that, you know, you're still poised and professional? But it was definitely a win, because it was a reaction to the community's demand to have equity in health. And now folks that traditionally didn't have any kind of healthcare or resources available, it's there for them now.
Fresno BHC, I think, was instrumental in that piece. And I say that because of the partnership, the reach that Fresno BHC had. They understood that we have a very ethnically and racially diverse community, and a lot of folks of whom English is their second language. So connecting with partners like the Fresno Center, right, to provide connections and trusted relationships is really important too, especially in the Hmong community. I remember being one of those folks who did outreach, who signed up people. And I remember folks saw me and folks would, I look like them. I talk, I speak to them in Hmong, and so there was that relationship that was built, right? And so there was that trust factor that was huge. And Fresno BHC understood that, right? That we needed to go and partner with organizations who are connected to communities and who communities trust, right? Because they're gonna trust information if these folks get them, right? And so that was really huge.
And especially when you're talking about a community like Fresno that has such a diverse population, to be able to have a coalition that came across language, legal status, looking at different things, it happened very differently. So I can't even imagine what that would have looked like, but I know that the numbers just wouldn't have been the same, and who would have been reached wouldn't have looked the same.
That's the very reason why it worked. The fact that we didn't follow mainstream traditional, enrollment to healthcare. And I think that people need to realize that type of success in the community has really set a trend, even if some folks have not made a connection, to COVID-19 testing and to vaccinations, because for the first time you have folks that are not county staff, that are not hospital staff, that are doing vaccinations, that are doing testing in the community, and that's all proof from work that happened in the BHC, seeing that community can help community itself. You don't have to have a PhD or a master's in order to connect with another individual and make them realize that this is for their own good. And if anything, these folks are more trusted because they look like them, they sound like them, they're their neighbors. So they're not afraid that these people are going to mislead them or hurt them in any way.
Fresno rental housing inspection program was necessary because we did a lot of work as Faith in the Valley and our partners in listening to the needs of community. We were in South Fresno, listening to folks who had never had someone knock on their door and listen to their needs. And one of the things that we heard constantly were people were living in substandard housing that was not safe. We were talking to elementary schools who their nurses were saying they were having to pull children out of class to pull a roach out of their ear, or seeing children with bug bites all over their bodies because of substandard housing. Those are the responsibilities of the landlord. And we thought maybe it's because tenants aren't sharing with their landlord what they need. And at times they were, and they weren't receiving no response from their landlord. And other times they weren't, because there were communities that have been taken advantage of in the past, that didn't speak the language, didn't speak English. They were immigrants, so they were being threatened that they would be deported if they said something, or evicted, and there is no housing, or the cost of moving somewhere else, somewhere that was safe, was too much for them to be able to afford. And so the proactive rental inspection program was a program where the city of Fresno would proactively inspect units throughout the city and say, you have to meet the baseline requirements of the state that are already law to keep our families safe. Fresno Building Healthy Communities really created a structure where we could come together, think together, strategize together, build narrative together, a communications department that helped us move the Fresno Bee into creating an entire series on what tenants were going through. And it wasn't new, it was just the first time that we had the investment to bring it to light.
One of the main things that we needed residents to know about and be aware of was this new program coming from the state, Transformative Climate Communities Program. And this was an opportunity to bring investment, funds for investment into a community that really had been divested in by the city's processes of the past and the decisions that had been made in the past. So that opportunity right there was, we could really see community members coming together and not just owning their power, but learning what was available and then being able to make their own decisions of what they would want to see come in the future of their community.
Actually seeing some recent changes in just the last 2 to 3 years is, in my eyes, monumental and long overdue. Seeing the West Fresno College campus go up just, excites me to my core, because, after working also on the Southwest Pacific Plan and, dreaming of all these things of what can be and hearing of what was from all the, elders in West Fresno, I'm just like, it's hard to actually envision what West Fresno could be. So seeing it just, like seeing that campus especially go up just gives me a lot of hope.
That was really a game changer for the city to understand we don't have control over this. The residents have really spoken on what they want to see. And as a state level program, this really is not just a catalyst, but a learning opportunity for all of California to see how community-driven processes can work. This was a huge win, but it's just the first start, and you don't want that to dwindle. You want to keep that momentum of the organizing. You want to keep the power on with the residents that they've already built up. And part of that is really going to be making sure that building healthy communities and that space continues to grow.
So I remember the beginnings of Measure P, when there was just a bunch of young people around the Boys and Men of Color table saying, we need to invest in our parks, there's nothing to do there. And there was this listening from Building Healthy Communities that said that we want to take this seriously. And so that evolved into Building Healthy Communities saying, hey, how are we going to put our muscle behind what these young people are saying that they want to see done in their communities?
It all started with young people of color in our community, even before the general plan. Just taking matters into their own hands, being empowered with BHC's support to go out and ask residents in disinvested neighborhoods what's important to you. And the answer was parks. Like, hello, parks.
The reason why I wanted to see more change inside our parks is originally I grew up on the west side, and a lot of the parks over there either don't have working lights, working restrooms. The restrooms are always filthy. There's a lot of trash. In order for children to have a space to at least run around, play, have fun, they need a clean park.
No, Measure P shows that growth in all of our advocacy, and that is where the youth of today are starting. And that's a beautiful thing, because imagine where it'll be 10 years from now.
Yeah, people took on our current mayor, who was our former police chief. We took on Mayor Brand, and we took on the chief of the fire department. And it was a hard fought, long campaign, a lot of misinformation, but we just kept going, providing information at the door, educating people about the importance of parks. And when that ruling came down from the court that Measure P was declared a win, we celebrated. Not only did we celebrate, our youth celebrated, because they felt like their voice was heard.
And the COVID Equity Project, like everything related to equity, was a fight. We were seeing really a lot of infections, a lot of limited information getting to Black and Indigenous people of color. Cultiva represents and targets Latino communities in particular. And so we were seeing the brunt of the impact, farm workers becoming infected, Latino families experiencing death early on, really not having the understanding about prevention. And so there was this effort, this concerted effort to sound the alarm bells with the County Board of Supervisors to say, like, hey, you guys need to deploy those dollars. Those dollars are needed for prevention. We need to be getting out, talking to families, telling them about prevention. We need to start doing everything we can to protect them. This was pre-vaccine.
Going through the pandemic of the century, I saw firsthand how building healthy communities worked to create the structure for the COVID Equity Project. I thought it was important for us to, with intentionality, focus on communities that were experiencing disparities, that were actually deliberately doing outreach and meeting people where they were at, to solve some of the problems by listening and acknowledging that not all of us seek healthcare in the same manner. And it was because of their involvement in the COVID Equity Project that I believe our community and our county had better results for our communities.
Once the vaccine was in place, there was a whole lot of effort also in let's get the vaccine out to these rural marginalized communities that don't have easy access. So I can say all of that with good faith happened because of the advocacy of Fresno BHC meeting with the county public health department, coalescing groups like Cultiva, like Jacara, like Firm, Reading and Beyond, all of us together to say we have the connections and community to make a difference. What we need is the resource. And so we were lucky. We've gotten, I think at last count, something like 13 million, 12 million in dollars that have allowed us to do that health education and outreach, dollars that have let us do the testing, dollars that have allowed us to do the vaccines, right? And offer isolation and quarantine support so that those low-income families could stay home and get well. The model that we created thanks to the advocacy of Fresno BHC is a model, again, that positions the people with the right capacity to serve their communities. We have immigrants serving immigrants. We have Punjabi speakers serving Punjabi speakers, African Americans serving African Americans, right? All of that is the right approach.
The Fresno Commission on Police Reform evolved out of just the movement and activities of young people. Young people saw what's happening around the nation and knew that Fresno wasn't exempt, and so they led a protest, a Black Lives Matter protest, and they had demands in that protest. And so I'm excited that I knew DeAngeli going into that I worked with those young people to help them organize that. I think they had me speak at it, and out of that came these demands. And from those demands, the initial response was that they were kind of naive, right? That some things couldn't be done, but you had groups like Fresno Building Healthy Communities say, well, make it so. We'll figure out a way for it to be done, to really push the envelope with decision makers, with stakeholders, to say, no, something needs to happen with these recommendations, which ultimately evolved into the Commission on Police Reform that we now had, which I think made some decent recommendations, but really highlights the power that community has to change and transform systems, especially when it comes to policing.
Well, I think the Commission on Police Reform will work because the community stays completely engaged. Our community CBOs stay engaged. Our voices of our young people get louder and stronger. They take office, they continue to fight. I don't think it will happen overnight, but I think we have a pathway, and I think we have such a groundswell of support and commitment, and I think honest faith that if we work together, we can get it done.
This has been something that has been in the works for years. We never take on an issue until we do our research, until we have all of our I's dotted and our T's crossed. So being able to bring this to the forefront, being able to assist in the Black Lives Matter movement that took place last year, was really putting a highlight on how important community policing is and what needs to be done and what needs to be reformed.
I was energized going into this legislative year to accomplish and get signed AB 559. It was important for me to make sure that our marginalized communities and voices were included at the table for those making decisions about that river, and believe it's important for the original stewards of the land in our tribal nations and the future stewards of our land in our young people to have a seat in making those decisions. Working with BHC, it's meant that I have confidence that we will have those from marginalized communities included in our conversations, that we'll have a lens towards equity, that we will make sure that this river provides meaningful access for all of our communities, For too long, the community that I represent, the half of Fresno County, has not been able to use this river space. And how many families and communities should be out there benefiting and will because of the work that we've been able to do collaboratively with BHC. I'm so proud of the work that we've been able to do and what it means for the future of our valley, that we'll have more access to the San Joaquin River.
Well, when I think about the last 10 years of Fresno BHC and the change that's happened in our community, I'm exhilarated, I'm also exhausted. I'm inspired, and I'm excited to think about the next 10 years.
What is beautiful about the engagement from Fresno BHC is that it is a long-term relationship, right? Like, there isn't this like, oh, just join us and then go away, right? Like, it's join us, we want to invest in you, whether you're an undocumented youth, whether you're an undocumented senior, right? Like, whether you're low income, if you're a concerned parent, there is this interest to help you go as far as you can in using your voice to create change that's going to be supported.
And they've really made themselves known in Fresno. You know, they've really created a space where it's like, nope, you have to take us into consideration.
I think our legacy is that we are actually organizing residents, organizing resources to help shape public policy. I think that's what our legacy is. We're connecting residents to their voice, which is their power.
Well, I think the brilliant piece about building healthy communities is that it wasn't just about housing. It wasn't just about schools. It wasn't just about healthcare for all. It was all of it together, and really seeing that all of those pieces, our schools, our youth, our housing, our communities, our neighborhoods, the toxic industries that shouldn't be in our neighborhoods, all of those pieces are what create one healthy Fresno. And now that's our brand.
Having a mentor or a space that's constantly supporting young people. We're there. I think we're there, and we take a really holistic approach. And I think that makes a huge difference.
The impact that building healthy communities had on me has been great. It has taught me skills that I didn't think I would actually develop myself.
Fresno Building Healthy Communities finds itself as the generator behind a lot of the activity that happens that makes a difference, particularly around creating safety and healing communities.
I think one critical thing that Fresno Building Healthy Communities has done has changed the whole conversation and even strategy around how do you empower communities. Like, before Fresno Building Healthy Communities, the strategy was people are objects, need to be changed, and that'll change our communities. And now, 10 years later, you see, no, people are the agents of change. They are the change agents, and it's through empowering them our communities change. And I think before Fresno Building Healthy Communities, we were kind of speaking to a wall, but as they began to talk about social determinants of health and so on and so forth, that has now become the predominant mode, and I think that doesn't happen without Fresno Building Healthy Communities.